Well, first, thanks for being here with me today. I'm excited. Richard and I have done some work together, so I'm excited to have this conversation for you all. And thanks to the London International Awards for having me as well. Let's see. As far as what's not in my bio, I'm originally from New York. I'm in LA now, like we were just saying. I was one of the pandemic defectors, and now I'm a really big fan. There's actually something about this whole sunshine thing. Career-wise, growing up and even in college, I always wanted to be a film director. And I kind of stumbled upon this whole marketing thing and was good at it and loved it. And now I feel very excited that I get to bring together my love of content and marketing. And it makes it a lot easier to get out of bed every day than when I was marketing some of the things that I'm less excited about. I think also I've worked on diverse audiences for I guess probably the last at least 15 years of my career. And I think developing campaigns for and with diverse creators is really inspiring. So I love that part. I think specifically about my role right now, I'm the head of emerging audience development. I, as Brett was saying, I focus on Black, Latino, or Latinx faith audiences and young adult, which is under 35. And I think about those audiences kind of across the whole org. So I'm reporting in through marketing, but thinking about it from a content perspective and the right kind of content that brings in those audiences and keeps them on the platform, marketing that content, brand campaigns around that, consulting on different title marketing that happens that speaks to those audiences, and then thinking about it from a product perspective and making sure that all those audiences have the best experience that they can have on platform. So I've been at Amazon Studios and Prime Video for a year and a half now, which kind of makes me a veteran because we've had crazy amounts of hiring over the last couple of years. But it's been a really great experience. So that's my background.
More important, what's your favorite ice cream flavor?
My favorite ice cream flavor is probably mint chocolate chip.
Oh, that makes you a rebel. That's a little rebel.
But I only want it when it's the green one. I don't want it to be the white mint chocolate chip. That's not
okay. Got it. So got it. Wow, that says a lot about you, and I'm gonna have to process that because good news that you and I will not be sharing ice cream. So that's good.
Wonderful, because I like to eat the whole pint. I think that's a serving size. So. What about you, Richard? Is there anything in your background that we should know about that wasn't in your
Yeah, thank you. I started out really young. I started out as a White House intern in the Clinton White House, and that actually led to, or was the launch of me wanting to do more in this, originally in the Latino space. And then as I started to work at Yum Brand, so for those who don't know Yum, Yum is a global holding company for Pizza Hut, Taco Bell, and KFC. At the time I was there, I think I still say they had Long John Silver's and A&W. For those that are global, may not know those brands. I am the oldest of four. My youngest brother is 20 years younger than me. Same mom and dad. Mm-hmm. Isaiah and I have a love-hate relationship. Sometimes I'm his dad. Exactly. I know, right? Is there a sofa here? Because I need to lay down. And then 10 years ago or so, I said, I think I've done my tour of duty in Louisville, Kentucky, is where I was based or lived. And just quit my job, resigned, and launched Rare. And it's been a journey. I will say that I feel at my age, I feel born again, and I love connecting with young folks. And so when Janina asked me to participate with her, I was like, yeah, absolutely. Let's stir some pot. Let's get it popping, as the kids say. Who inspires you though, Janina?
I think beyond my family, I've had some amazing bosses in my career. So I think some of them, I just had lunch yesterday with Janine Liebert, who was the CMO of BET when I was there, and she inspires me both in work but really in life. Her whole approach to life is just so positive, and she's like she's really taught me about how to interact with people in business and how to maintain relationships. So I think she's somebody. And then I just have an amazing group of friends, particularly women that are around me in general. And I think they inspire me all the time. We bounce all sorts of ideas off of each other. I think that's something that like I've learned later than I wish I had, like the importance of building relationships and continuing to nourish that network through your career. I think it's really important to have connections that you can call on for various things, whether it's I need a doctor in LA, but people you can bounce ideas off of or work on projects with or get advice. And sometimes those people are within my industry and sometimes they're not. And you need a little bit of both. And I think that's the piece that I've definitely done as I've gotten older and more senior, but I wish I had been better about it when I was younger. There's so many amazing people that I work with and touch that I didn't stay connected to. And I think that was a miss on my part. But now I'm much better. Richard and I, for example, met on a project for BMW. That's where we first met, right? Yeah. We met on a project for BMW when I actually had my own agency at the time, and Richard was doing his work with Rare, and we connected there and stayed.
And it was love at first sight. Just say it. It was love at first sight. Just say it.
And I mean, that's probably, how long ago would that have been? 8 years ago, probably, maybe
a while. Yeah.
Yeah, a while ago. So it was a long time ago, and we've stayed in touch. And I think partially Richard has been responsible for making sure that he's even better about staying connected. But he does a big what would you call it, a summit, a conference for Latino executives every year. And so I attended that this year, and he's now doing some work together with me at Prime Video, reaching Latino audiences. So I think it's just really important to have those relationships and nourish them. And so I'm inspired. I think the original question was about my inspiration, and I went off on a tangent about people in my life, but I guess like those are the people that inspire me, like having this network of really amazing people, both personally and professionally. So. Yeah.
I think so for those on this that are participating on this call, there is this balance that we want to create of the IQ and the EQ. The EQ is the emotional intelligence. And for those, I think this is a nice sort of build that Janina and I are exercising and engaging in, because I think it's the emotional intelligence that oftentimes is not addressed. It's not elevated. And so what Gina shared about building a network, you may not necessarily need the person immediately, but you never know down the road. I mean, when I first met Janina, I didn't know that I had no idea that she and I would be sitting virtually across from each other today, and building relationships does take work. I think there's more of an art to it than a science. Some of you might lean more into the science piece of I need to make 5 calls a day or whatever. I don't operate that way. I just like, oh shoot, I haven't heard from Janina in a while. Let me go give her a shout out. So I encourage you again, as we engage deeper in this conversation this morning, is to really kind of push yourself out of your own comfort zone, because this is going to feel a little soft. We're not going to get hard hitting. There will be some hard hitting questions. But for me, I would say that who inspires me are aside from my mama, is really young people. I get super inspired by people who have an idea and then just explode it into something that they themselves could have never imagined. That just truly inspires me, and then makes me want to be and to my phone is going crazy, to do more. Let's talk about building stories. Janina, what's the most memorable lesson or learning that sticks with you today?
I think it's just that, like, I think particularly because I work in the space that I work in, that your unique perspective and experiences, both in business, but really in life, are super valuable. And I think that's really important, especially now, as I think organizations are thinking more and more about, reaching all customers from all different types of backgrounds and consumers from all different types of background, like having your unique perspective, whatever that might be, is really valuable. I think that's what I would say.
Yeah, I early on in my career had a situation, and the situation was that I was a bit of a brat. It's too early to use, foul language, right? And it was a reporter. I worked in PR, and I had sent her an apology card. She sent me a card back and said, "Life is but a dream, take it light." I can't find that card, but I distinctly remember receiving it.
That's amazing.
Right? And I don't always take it light, but every now and then that card sort of hits me in the head like, relax, relax. It's all going to work out. It may not work out the way you want, but in the end, it's going to work out. And I think what I have learned, through my own professional journey, is that I don't want to lose myself along the way, right? Along the way of freaking out. And some of you that are going to be moving into, your career as content creators, influencers, and so forth, the pressure is heavy. But I encourage you not to lose you along the way, your demeanor, your style, your magic, your genius, all that, all that good stuff. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think that's really true. And I think I used to constantly argue things like I would take things like super personally. And I think, in some places there's like this sort of combative or adversarial relationship that exists between like creatives and account people or planners. And I was always like on that side, the account or strategy and that kind of side of the business, particularly when I was on the agency side. But that hadn't been my experience. I think of my time at Global Hue or Viacom and BT, or even when I had my own company, and I had the experience of really great collaboration with creative teams. And I think that made for the best work. But I think there have been periods where I'm arguing things. I even yesterday was having a conversation. Somebody had asked for an opinion on something, and I was like going so hard on my opinion. And I think back in the day, I would have just kept going like that. And then I took a moment and I was like, wait, why am I even arguing this? Like, this doesn't even matter. Like, sure, that's fine. Here's my opinion. Do what you would like to do. But I think that has changed too. So like, to your point, like not losing yourself and not going crazy over, as my dad would always say, don't sweat the small stuff. I mean, I know it was that saying, but he would
totally. No, totally. And I think, and for those today, this morning, I think that's valuable because at the end of the day, life is but a dream. And the next project will come up. And I'm constantly learning. I'm learning and working with Janina in terms of how companies evolve, how companies shift. Every company has its respective culture. And so my job is to exercise and share, my experience and my magic. And then the client, whomever they might be, will take it or leave it. We can only do so much. This goes into the segue of multicultural. Gina, you've been in the space for quite a while. What have you seen in terms of the shift? So if you think about like when you started and what it is now, what's been that shift in the multicultural consumer sort of market space?
I think once upon a time, multicultural was just completely about casting and translations. So you would take the general market work. I think even when I was at Global Hue, like you would take the general market work and you would cast it differently, or you would translate the same spot into Spanish. And, maybe you would use a spicy condiment or something. And that would be the signal for multicultural, but that would kind of be it. Now I think it's much more about connecting authentically. And sometimes that means leading with multicultural. I mean, I think there's more of an understanding, or if there's not, then, this is something that people should be doing, that oftentimes you want to start with the Black audience, for example, not always the Black audience, but whoever the influential audience is. So but understanding, for a lot of things that we work on, like for a Black audience, because they have a tendency to influence all other audiences. and I guess like, understanding this is a global audience here, whoever the most, influential and socially active groups are within, your location. Sometimes you want to start there. So I think the evolution is much more about unique insights, dedicated teams, really having that representation, both, on a client side and on an agency side, and then, trying to be as authentic as possible.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we've seen in the brand space is where, before it was super segmented. So you had the Black family, the Latino family, the whatever. And now we're seeing integration. Now you're seeing, mixed couples in a general market ad. Before that was 10 years ago, maybe not necessarily. I mean, some brands might have. You're seeing ads that are in what I call Spanglish, English and Spanish, that are sort of, sort of, what is it, collide together. So I think there's been that shift. What are you seeing brands do more of though, Janina?
You know what I would say though, like just wrapping that up, is like something about that I've seen also is around intersectionality. And I think you were kind of touching on that. The idea that audiences aren't one thing. You can be, you can check multiple different boxes. And I think that there's more of an understanding of that happening right now.
No, I think that's important. I mean, as we're now, today is officially the first day of Hispanic Heritage Month for those in the United States. Hey, my agency's had the pleasure of helping create and shape a campaign with Janina's team entitled Cuéntame Más, Tell Me More. And I think what we're experiencing, shameless plug there, Janina, if you don't mind. You're welcome. And so in this Cuéntame Más, for those who don't speak Spanish or for those who are not bilingual, it's like, again, tell me more, and kind of leaning in. And I think what brands are doing a little better job of, and that is that leaning in more to better understand diverse consumers and diverse consumers from a lot of different sort of platforms or for different pillars, right? So you have, I think before it was, Black, Hispanic, Asian, LGBTQ, then gay, lesbian was, it's sort of a separate, and now it's beginning to intersect. Is that what you're seeing, Janina? Again, so again, in light of Hispanic Heritage Month, for example, starting today, we're seeing a lot more, but how much more do you think companies should and could do?
I think that you're seeing a lot more. I mean, for even with us, for example, like we're doing more and more. We have, all the campaigns that my team is working on, but beyond the dedicated campaigns, there's inclusion kind of within the teams all the way throughout the organization, whether that's within marketing or in content development, so that, like I was saying earlier, that you have those different unique perspectives, and that we're thinking about. I worked on this campaign for this show called Boomerang, based on the movie, when I was at BET, and the tagline on it was, there's more than one way to be Black. So there's more than one way to be Black. There's more than one way to be Latino. There's more than one way to be gay. Like,
I love that, by the way.
There's not just one way of looking at things. And, one of the things that we talk about is like, you want to see, let's see some Latino vampires. Let's see some, all different stories, or let's just see normal stories of people living their everyday lives, and not necessarily just about trauma or about race or about struggle. And I think that we're starting to see a lot more of that. So
I think that's so important. And by the way, I want to invite everyone to feel free to, ask a question in the chat. When you said there were more ways to see consumers based on the tagline from the past movie, it got me thinking about inclusion. So let's kind of move into that area. What does inclusion mean to you, Janina?
Yeah, I mean, I think inclusion is about, seeing everyone, and having all of those diverse perspectives that I mentioned. I think at Amazon, we have our leadership principles. I don't know how much people are familiar with those, but they're sort of like the guiding force kind of behind the company. And the number one leadership principle is customer obsession. So always thinking about our customer and their needs, and giving them the best experience. And one thing that I really do love about the company, and it's like I'm drinking the Kool-Aid a bit, but it's true. It's really something that we believe in, and like you hear it out loud every day in meetings. It's not just something that hangs on a wall somewhere. So with that in mind, something that I talk about and we talk about is that if we're going to be customer obsessed, we have to think about all of our customers from many different backgrounds. And so, we do that first by seeking out stories that amplify the voices of characters across all different races and ethnicities and sexual orientation and, body size and gender identity and kind of across the board. And we have an inclusion policy for our content and for our content development that I think is really kind of leading the way and the best in the business. That's really about making sure that we have that inclusion both in front of and behind the camera and within the teams. And I think having that inclusion and having all of those diverse perspectives really brings the best work, and then brings the content and marketing campaigns that excite audiences.
But don't you think that consumers are now expecting it? They want to be included in.
Yeah, I think that they are expecting it, and they should expect it. That doesn't make it wrong that we're doing it, because we are providing what the customer wants.
Mhm.
But I think beyond that, it's about, I think the customer is expecting to see it in a way that feels authentic, and not just performative. And I think that's where there's a difference. And I think the other place that makes a difference is that, sometimes you're just seeing it in the talent. So you're just seeing it, on the screen. And you can tell that there's not somebody, behind the scenes who's writing this content or developing it, because there's unique perspectives that you would know if you were of that group. And so you can tell when it's just somebody that's cast in a role versus somebody who there was kind of the inclusive and diverse perspectives kind of all the way through the process.
We have a question from John, and forgive me, John, I'm not going to try to pronounce the last name because I'm going to butcher it. So Janina, you mentioned wishing that you had nourished your network from a younger age. How would you both recommend going about it? Is there a memorable message or moment that stands out in how someone has stayed in touch with you? And don't have to mention me, Janina, it's okay.
I already mentioned you. Yeah, I mean, I think that it's really about staying consistent. I think Richard touched on it a little bit too, about not always reaching out to somebody when you need something. Mm-hmm. So just, it's really just like making sure that people remember that you're there. Mm-hmm. So, you could put something on your calendar that you want to have. It could be a quarterly touch base. It doesn't have to be something big, just like, I was thinking of you, or here's an article that I thought of. There's an agency that has talked to me about potentially doing some work. And, we've talked here and there for quite a while. And she sent me a message yesterday that she was at a conference, and something that I had told her that was kind of just a joke. Somebody said something that reminded her of that. And she sent me an email and mentioned it. And then we're like, okay, let's set up a meeting to connect as a result of that. But it doesn't have to be that way. I think it's just finding connection points, and you can go about it in either way. Either you can have it as something that's planned, where you put it into your calendar, or you can have it as something that's just that sort of comes up organically. I think this year I've made a point of saying, okay, every week I'm going to do one call that is something that can help to either expand my network or think about my future career growth. or something like that. And I'm going to do another call that's reaching back to like somebody that reaches out to me and asks to have, a call about their career or their growth. So sort of like a younger professional that might be reaching out. I'll get like a bunch of people that might contact me on LinkedIn, and I can't talk to every single person. But I have made that commitment this year that I was going to do at least one of those calls each week. So by the end of the year, I've spoken to 104 people. I've spoken to 52 people that I'm trying to help with some of whatever they're trying to grow in, and I'm talking to 52 people that will help me. So I think that's I've had to put it into a practice that's a little bit more I guess formatted or analytical.
Structured, yeah.
Structured, yeah, there we go, structured. But that's the way that I'm going about it. As far as somebody that stands out, there is somebody that I think has been really good about this. She's I think she just graduated from college. So it's pretty impressive to me. She was like the whole time that she was in college, she would reach out, she would ask about working different events. She's a publicist. And so she had asked about working different events with us. And so we would, when I was at BET, we would bring her on. We would have like our agency hire her as, the staff that would work on site in an event for the day. Anytime she, follows me on social media. So anytime something happens, she'll always send me a note, a personalized note, or she'll send a comment or whatever it is, but she like tracks everything. And I've seen her doing it with other people too. And she's very, very good about that. And so as a result, somebody had asked me for a publicist for something, and I had recommended her, originally not realizing she was in college, because she had been so good about staying on top of things and always providing thoughts, and she would forward an article here and there. And so I had no idea. And then I realized she was, and I was like, well, I still think she's good. So I think you should hire her either way. But that's an example that I can think of. She's never really asking for anything, but the way that she's presented herself has made it so that I'm an advocate for her.
Yeah, I love that. Second, Brianna Henry. Hello, Janina. You've worked with clients who preach that they want to be more inclusive, but over the course of a project, they fall back into status quo. If so, how do you guide clients to a more inclusive space while reassuring them that it's the right way to go? It's a lot to unpack there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying. I think this is also about having the right people in the room who can speak to the importance of inclusivity. I also think like that's the reason that, like, for example, I was brought into the role that I'm in now. And so, I haven't really had that experience where I am now. But I think in similar situations, you need to talk about sometimes the bottom line, unfortunately. And it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about you can't be obsessed with customers if you're not obsessed with all customers. So sometimes it is about showing the buying power of a certain audience, or the level of influence that a certain audience has, and showing that impact. I talk all the time with my team about, like, we have to show the wins, because we want to make sure that clients and companies understand that we're not doing this just because it's the right thing to do, even though it is the right thing to do, but that having more inclusive marketing and more inclusive content will ultimately impact their bottom line. So I think that's usually my approach. I don't know, Richard, if you have anything to add.
I agree. I mean, I think you have to show it. And there's particularly if I think for us folks of color, I'll just speak for myself. Sometimes I've had to put my emotions and my passions in check. Sometimes my emotions get into my passion. And when that happens, and then, to thy own self be true, that you have to know yourself, I have to quickly say, Rich, this is not personal. This is not, and you shared that early on in our conversation, Janina. It's not personal. So if I can show the client, right, numbers, insights, trends, buying power that's relevant and meaningful to the brand, then it's really up to them. So no, I think that's important. And I also think that, again, we also have to take a step back and then stop beating that drum if it's out of tune, because it's not in tune with what, the client, and sometimes it's the individual. Sometimes you're having to sell into the individual and he or she are just not getting it for whatever reason. And I think that's when we have to take a step back and say, maybe not right now. Maybe not right now, That leads into us, Janina, in terms of the mindset of having an inclusive mindset. I think oftentimes when people see the word diversity or inclusion, they think, well, that's not my job. I don't have to do it. But essentially, as marketers, as content creators, I think it's everyone's job. How have you, with your teams throughout your career, even though I know you've worked with BET and others that focused on specific segmented markets, but even in that space, to have that more inclusive environment, to ask like, who's not around this table, so to speak.
Yeah.
Have you done that?
Yeah. I mean, I think part of it is kind of what we were just talking about. You want customers to see themselves reflected in an authentic way. And I think it's important to communicate that. And so that's something that I've done, is, to kind of show people that we want customers to be saying like, oh, you get me and you've got me.
Yeah.
And I'll come back for more and I'll tell other people too. And I think that's, that's us driving loyalty and advocacy. And I think it's all of our roles, no matter what background you come from within an organization, to think about that and to look around the table and notice when there's a voice missing that might provide a different perspective. And that's not me talking just about, race or ethnicity. It's, all different backgrounds. Is everyone at this table, over 45 trying to figure out how to market to 20-year-olds or vice versa?
Right.
I think there's all different perspectives that you can keep in mind.
Or a group of men trying to determine how to market to women.
Yeah, how to market tampons. I mean, like, I think I think there's less and less of that, but I think there's always room for improvement. And I think some companies are getting it better than others. My team works on, in addition to all of our emerging audiences work, I also oversee cultural events. So that's like Black History Month, Women's History Month, as Richard said, Hispanic Heritage Month, which is happening right now, Pride. And, as we're talking to agency partners, it's important that we, have representation from those groups trying to build those campaigns. There was a time not too long ago, like within this last year, where we were talking to potential agencies about working with us on these cultural events campaigns. And, the team that presented was all, white, and male and older, and they were presenting to do our cultural events. And I, at the end of the presentation, they were definitely capable on marketing in general, but I was like, so can you tell me how you've approached, this is a project focused on diverse audiences. How have you approached that in the past? And how would you approach this one? And the example that was given to me was something about a pro bono campaign that they had done for prison reform or something. And I just was like, I just asked you about diverse audiences and your example was about prison reform. Like, that's so off key. And so like when I'm talking to, other people internally, not only do I think they're not the right people to talk to, to develop campaigns that are specifically crafted for diverse audiences and cultural events, but I'm not sure that they should be developing campaigns for anything, because all of the work that we're doing and all of the content that we're doing is really supposed to speak to a wide audience and diverse audiences, and so like we want somebody who understands that and understands those audiences. So
it's about having the mindset, and I think that I think that part of that is to raise our hand and say, this doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
Based on the example that you gave, this doesn't make sense to me. We have about 5 minutes left, so I encourage anyone who would like to ask a question, put it in the chat, so we can further expand this enriching conversation. So, Janina, what are you now going forward from an inclusion standpoint? what would you like to see more of from a content creation side? Go ahead.
Oh no, I was thinking.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah. So I'll start. I'd like to see, and you brought this up. I mean, I'd love to see more stories that are part of an even broader sort of or that paints even a broader sort of canvas of, Latinos, for example.
Mhm.
And you and I've had this conversation before. I haven't seen enough content around Latinos, joy, love, sci-fi. I'd love to see more of that. What about you, Janina? Whether it's Black or Latino, what have you?
Yeah, I think across the board, I think it is about showing stories about joy and sort of everyday stories when we talk about diverse audiences. I think the same thing is true. Like I said, my team works on young adult, and that's an audience that we're focused on too. I think thinking about, like, sometimes there were very stereotypical on the YA content that's developed too, and sort of these like angsty, teens and 20 somethings. And I think there's more stories to be told for those audiences too. I think you and I have talked about this before also, but like I think that there's more stories to be told from a global perspective. And I think that's something that I'm really excited about with some of the content that we're working on at Amazon Studios, is really showing that sort of global perspective. I think that, that's really exciting. And we just won an Emmy for Lizzo's Watch Out for the Big Girls. And I think that's another, group of people who may not have seen themselves, represented sort of in like the body positivity space. And I think that's really important. So I think just like expanding all the stories that are out there. I like that we're telling more, like that horror has kind of evolved so much, and there's like all of this comedy horror that's really interesting, and sort of diverse comedy horror that's coming. But yeah, I think there's just like, it's so crazy because there's such an insane amount of content out there, that there's even still room for more and more stories. But there are, I mean, there's all these people on the earth, and everybody has a unique story. And, anyone who's on this call has something that's happened in their life, or that could be an amazing story to be told to others. So there's just like endless opportunity out there, I think.
You mentioned Lizzo. Are we going to see, not necessarily, with Amazon, or maybe so with Amazon Prime Video, are we going to see more characters that are plus size? Are we going to see a lot more of that, diversity?
Yeah, I think we're gonna see a lot more. I mean, I think the positive thing that's happened with some of the some of the things that have gone on in 2020 with race, starting with George Floyd, or even before that and beyond, is that it's opened up a lot of companies' eyes to all of the different people that are out there. I think that's not just something that, like I said, is living in race. I think race is of course a big piece of it, but I think we're just seeing broader stories across the whole landscape. So I think, yeah, you are going to see that. And I think somebody just asked in the chat about brands that are doing a good job. And I think there's plenty of brands that I could mention, but just on the body positivity thing, I was thinking about like Good American, for example. When you shop online with them for like their jeans or whatever, you can see them in, like, I think there's a couple of companies that are doing this. I just happen to know that about Good American, but they have 3 different models. So you can see it on different body types. So you're not just looking at, clothing on, one type of body. You can say like, oh, this person's a little bit more, this size 8 or size 12 or whatever is a little bit more like what my body is. So I want to see what it looks like on that. So I think that's really interesting. Okay, there's a couple of questions. I think you're muted, I think, Richard.
So sorry. Thank you. Jessica has a question. How do you envision marketing audience development at Prime Video and for the next 10 years? How is that going to evolve?
Yeah, I mean, I think it just continues to grow. Like the audiences that I'm focused on are growth opportunities right now, and I think we'll continue to nurture those. But then there might be other audiences that emerge from there, or different pockets within those audiences. I think young adults, as we move them, into an older, they'll become older, and then there'll be a new focus on young adults, and that evolves because what this generation is interested in is different than what the next generation is interested in. I think there's some evolution that happens or will happen, whether it's with Prime Video or across the whole industry, really, on what content looks like for kids and younger people, like in their teens and maybe 20s, but like people who don't currently consume content the way that we might. And probably some of you might even fall into the other bucket, but the way that I watch an insane amount of content, and a lot of the people around me do, and it's not just because it's my job, it's also because I like watching it. But I think for younger audiences, that's not the case, and so I think there will be an evolution in the way that content is developed or marketed that reaches those younger audiences, because everyone is scrambling trying to figure out how to get them engage on a platform to watch something that isn't on TikTok, or is that the future of content? So I think that's what remains to be seen, and if someone can figure that one out, that's the money right there.
Well, I think also too, in light of these various platforms and how content continues to either shrink in terms of length, so then it's this quick bite, I guess, way of communicating. I think the last question we have, because I think we're hitting the hour, is what's your favorite project you've been able to work on and why?
That's hard. Let's see. I think I've had a lot of stuff that I've loved working on. I really loved working on the launch of BET Plus, and kind of building that up. But I think my favorite project is probably, I worked on Game of Thrones for HBO, and we were working on the project that was supposed to help to bring in younger audiences and more diverse audiences. And yeah, I'm a huge fan too. I think it's so much easier to market something when you're actually passionate about it yourself. But yeah, so I think so we were trying to bring in those audiences, and sort of had this insight that there was a lot of celebrities who were big fans of the show and would promote it in their social, unsolicited. And so how could we leverage that? And so I worked on building a mixtape that talked about what happened in the first few seasons of Game of Thrones, it was sort of like a cliff notes, like a musical cliff notes of kind of what happened. And there were, great artists in it. The first one that we did, I think we had like Daddy Yankee and Big Boy and Common and all these different artists creating songs, and we used the music from the score from Game of Thrones mixed with hip hop and Latin beats, and made
so cool
songs. It still exists. You can go on, I think it's still on SoundCloud, but you could go on there. It was called Catch the Throne. And it would give you the updates of what happened in the earlier seasons. And then it was so successful that we ended up doing a second one, and this time including metal artists as well. So we had Killswitch Engage and Anthrax, and then Snoop Dogg did it, and there was just a number of different artists. And so that the second one was about the different families, so everybody did stories around the different families. But I think working on that, and I had no idea about music publishing, I had no idea about any of that, and I think I think all the projects that I've loved are the ones where I've been able to have my hands in so many different things. So building that and learning, I was negotiating contracts. That wasn't something that I had experience doing before, and being in the studio, developing the songs, And then marketing that, the marketing piece was a little bit, more comfortable for me, more in my comfort zone, but developing all the creative. And then there were events. We went to South by Southwest. There was an event at the Barclays Center. Like there was a lot that happened with that whole campaign. And it was one of my favorite things I've worked on for sure.
That's awesome. Well, we have to close now, I believe.
I was going to answer one thing though, because somebody
sure.
asked about the art, and I just wanted to give a shout out for the artist, because this one is Corey Pemberton. And it's actually a friend of mine owns a gallery here in LA called Unwrapped. And it's all artists of color and women. And they're like unrepresented artists that she's discovered, and like then they, it helps to build their audience. So that's Corey Pemberton's work. I think he has a show coming up soon here in LA. And actually this one is from Ghana. I bought it on a trip when I was in Ghana. So but I just thought I would answer that.
I love that.
Yeah.
Final word of advice. What I heard you say in your example of one of your favorite more memorable projects is that you stepped out of your comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like for you to expand that as we close. Would you suggest give some words of encouragement to the folks here about stepping out of their comfort zone? Yeah,
I think like the best way to grow is to push yourself and to do some kinds of stretch projects. I think that's really how you grow and you get to the next phase. So whatever type of company that you're in, if there's an opportunity for you to work within a different department, if you have like an opportunity for rotating or shadowing someone or partnering on some other kind of project, or a different type of client or something, I would take those opportunities because sometimes you find that there's an area that you're really interested in or really good at that you didn't even know about. And if you end up staying in the same area as you've been in the past, it helps to understand what's happening, like what the different perspectives are, because I think one of the things that makes you a good leader, that makes you strong in any like business environment and in life, is really having empathy and understanding where people are kind of coming from. And so as you work in those different areas within an organization, you can learn a little bit about that. And then when you're having that conversation with somebody, you can understand like, oh, I think you might be coming from here. And you can also probably sell things a little bit easier if you understand, kind of their background and where they're coming from. So I think that's what that.
Yeah, no, I'm a firm believer that, when you start feeling some pain, that means you're stretching, which is a good thing, right? We're stretching ourselves, we're growing. It's not always pleasant. It gets uncomfortable, but I think that's necessary for us to grow.